Prithvi Shantirantarikshagam Shantir Dyav Shantir Disha Shantiravantara Disha Shantiragnishantir Vayu Shantiraditya Shantish Chandrama Shantir Nakshatrani Shantirapa Shantiroshadaya Shantir Vanaspataya Shantir Gau Shantiraja Shantirashva Shantir Purusha Shantir Brahma Shantir Brahmana Shantir Shantireva Shanti Shantirme Astu Shantihi. May there be peace on earth and in the sky. May there be peace in the water and in all directions. May there be peace in the plants, in the trees, and in animals. May there be peace in the hearts of all beings. May there be peace in everyone and in everything. Sarvetra sukhinas santu, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschit dukkha bhag bhavet, sarvastaratu durgani, sarvo bhadrani pashyatu, sarvas sadbuddhimapnotu, sarvas sarvatra nandatu. May all be happy and healthy. May all see what is good, and may no one experience misery. May all overcome their obstacles and acquire good tendencies. May people everywhere find joy and fulfillment. Let us now spend some time touching the center of peace and joy in our hearts. A good way to begin the practice is to withdraw the scattered energies of the mind and bring them to rest on one point. That point can be our own breathing. Let us therefore practice breathing with awareness. As we breathe in, let us visualize that our body and mind are being filled with love, strength, and compassion. And as we breathe out, let us release all the stress, anxiety, and exhaustion in the body and mind. Let us practice this way for a while. Let us now turn our attention to the region of our heart. Although God is present everywhere and in everyone, the divine presence can be felt most clearly in our own hearts. We can meditate in any way we have been taught. To remain focused, we can take the help of a short mental prayer or a mantra or a divine name. Let us now spend some time dwelling on the presence of God in our hearts. Asatoma Satkamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Aviravirmaheti Rudrayatte Dakshinam Mukham Tenamam Pahi Nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the Divine Consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. We begin on page 25, the last para. Descended we now from the aspirations of philosophy to the religion of the ignorant. At the very outset, I may tell you that there is no polytheism in India. In every temple, if one stands by and listens, one will find that worshippers applying all the attributes of God, including omnipresence, to the images. It is not polytheism, nor would the name henotheism explain the situation. The rose, called by any other name, would smell as sweet. Names are not explanations. So up to this point, Swamiji discussed some of what we might say the philosophical factors in the Hindu tradition, speaking about the nature of the self, ignorance, and so on. And now he says, descend we now from the aspirations of philosophy to the religion of the ignorant man. So, as we have seen on earlier occasions, when someone says, I'm religious, that is a very broad term. Because religion, if we must use that word, has got different layers. So someone may be very deeply immersed in the philosophy of religion, in what the different concepts that are used in visualizing, striving after that higher reality. Then there are others who are more involved in the practice of religion, not so much concerned about which Upanishads says what about the Atman, or what does the karma theory really mean in all its complexities, but really, what do I need to do in order to attain that goal? So they might practice prayer, they might do worship, they might do whatever we classify as religious, without necessarily always being fully aware of the intellectual or philosophical foundation of those practices. And that is what Swamiji says is the religion of the ignorant. Now, the word ignorant here has to be taken in a very broad sense. I mean, people who are trying to understand the highest truth, even through philosophical implications, are equally ignorant about the higher reality. So in that sense, people with knowledge are people who are enlightened. So everyone else is ignorant. Now, among the ignorant, some may be attracted to the philosophical part of a religion, some may be attracted to the, I was about to say practical part, but the problem with using the word practical, it makes seem like the philosophical thing is like impractical. And so, let me say a kind of yeah, I don't think there is any right word to find. I was about to say the doing part, but again, even someone who is reflecting on that higher reality is doing reflection. Reflection is an activity. It's a mental activity, and so there isn't really any clear way to distinguish between these, except to know that we could be religious by being purely reflective on the, and such thing often gets limited to the textual study of religion, while there are others who might have some basics in what the texts say, but their religion is not so much focused on texts. That's the idea. And the best example we have here at the Vedanta Center is Ramakrishna himself, who didn't go to school. He could read, he could write, but he didn't read any books. He didn't read the Upanishads or anything. At the same time, from his life, we also know that you don't have to read the books in order to acquire the wisdom that is in the books. So reading the books itself doesn't guarantee you the wisdom that is in it. Nor should looking at Ramakrishna as an example should make us feel not reading books is what's going to make me enlightened either. And so that's something that we need to keep in mind. And so Swamiji takes up therefore this one major question about polytheism. The Hindus as worshippers of many gods. Now we have a lot of school groups, college groups sometimes. Sometimes they invite me to go and speak with them in the schools. Sometimes the schools, the classes visit here. And when I, in my introductory remarks, often begin by giving what we might say the philosophical framework behind Vedanta, of what the nature of the human situation, the different ways we can think about the self, about the body, the mind, and Atman, and all of that. And then when I invite them to ask any questions, one of the questions that inevitably comes up is regarding the Hindu worship of gods. And then, of course, and I often begin by telling them that a part of the problem, and probably a major part of the problem, is involved in translation itself. Because when we use the word God, God is a word in English. No Vedanta texts are written in English. And what we have are translations. We might have explanations, but the primary texts of Vedanta are all in Sanskrit or in languages in the Indian subcontinent. And therefore, when you translate something from those books into English, we have to ask a question: what is it from those texts that is translated as God into English? And then we can come upon many different words. There is, of course, the word deva in Sanskrit. Deva comes from the root div, to shine. And so more literal meaning of the word deva would mean the shining one, the celestial one. But clearly, in every translation project is also an interpretation project, because what we are trying to do is to find a word in a different language and a different culture which might come as close to the text, the word that we are translating from a certain text. Now, it's never an exact synonym. There's always something, some connotation is lost and some new connotation is gained. And so for whatever reason, they chose to translate this word deva or Ishvara sometimes. Ishvara really means the ruler, into word God. Now the word God, there's something from the Abrahamic traditions which was already translated as God into English. So now you have this God translated from the Judeo-Christian texts, because those texts are not originally written in English either. So there is something from them which got translated into English as God. There is something from these Sanskrit texts got translated as God. Now you have a flattened out translation, well, God in Vedanta, God in Christianity, God in Islam. And then eventually, there is one beautiful book written by a professor at UPenn called The Evolution of God. So even this debate of monotheism and polytheism, what that book does is shows that even in Abrahamic traditions, it didn't start out with monotheism. The idea of one God did evolve over time. There were these Moloch and Yahweh, and he's mentioned. And it's an academic work, scholarly work, showing there were all these different tribal gods, which eventually then, in the course of evolution, finally all came together and became this one God. Now that became then a defining characteristic of the Abrahamic traditions. And then these Indologists go to the East, start translating Hindu and Buddhist texts. And then, of course, there is another God. Now, because there are many devas, there is Indra, Varuna, the Vedic gods, and then there is Krishna, Shiva, and all of these. So then became, well, you cannot use that word God in singular. There are many gods. So that's how this dialectic was created. This one God, the monotheistic God, as opposed to these many gods from the East. And that's what Swamiji is referring to here. So he says, let me tell you that there is no polytheism in India. In every temple, and if one stands by and listens, one will find the worshippers applying all the attributes of God, including omnipresence, to the images. So, when Hindus worship whatever deity they are worshipping, they never see their deity that this is just like one of those 33 million gods that they have. Because each of these deities in the mind of the worshipper is omnipresent, all-pervading, omniscient. So all of the adjectives that are applied to this one monotheistic God are the adjectives applied to all of these different deities within the Indian tradition. And then he quotes, the rose called by any other name would smell as sweet. Names are not explanations. And this quote is again from Romeo and Juliet, from Shakespeare. We saw earlier in this paper, Swamiji had quoted from the same play by Shakespeare. So what Swamiji is saying is that whether you call something monotheism or polytheism, or you call someone God or Deva or whatever, the thing is what it is. Just changing the name of a something doesn't mean anything. And that's why he says names are not explanations. Just because I'm able to give a name to something. In fact, the name that was given to this was called henotheism. I think this was probably promoted by Max Muller. And the idea was to take any one ideal and to elevate it to that infinite. And so to distinguish it from monotheism and polytheism, a term called henotheism was introduced. And what Swamiji says is, even that really doesn't cover the entirety of what image worship, Murti Puja, means in India. The rose called by any other name would smell as sweet. This is a wonderful quote, actually. And even in our daily life, remembering this can be very helpful. Because sometimes we can get very upset if other people say something about us which is not very complimentary. Just think about it this way. If someone were to come and say to our friend, you are stupid, you are a fool, it's very difficult to keep a straight face when someone says that to us. Or even if someone doesn't straight to your face, you know that some people are talking about you in not very complimentary terms. And it's easy to get upset, it's easy to get angry, it's easy to then go and pick up a quarrel, any number of things we can do. But sometimes just remembering this, a rose called by any other name would smell as sweet, that can be very helpful. And it is this. If someone says I'm a fool, that doesn't make me a fool. I am who I am. No matter what label is put upon me, I don't change. Just as if someone would say, you are like Einstein, you are a genius, and that makes us happy. But still, if I'm a fool, if someone calls me a genius, that doesn't make me a genius either. So I remain who I am. And this is important because it's not just about calling names. It's about even characterizing the ideas that you might have or the beliefs that you might have. It's possible for someone to not say anything to you personally, but to say, your ideas are ridiculous, or what you believe in is just nonsense. Again, we can get upset or angry even by that kind of a characterization. But on the other hand, if we remember this, my ideas are what my ideas are. If someone says my ideas are ridiculous, I mean, they could be ridiculous, but they don't become ridiculous just because someone calls them so. And so we can be completely secure in our self-understanding or our belief, or our self-understanding of ourselves, of or our ideas either. Also, because if someone says that you are a fool or your ideas are terrible, and if we get angry, what it means is that there is this kind of a part of me, however tiny little part, which suspect that this person may be telling the truth. And so that is what makes me angry. Because if I'm certain that, no, it's like what Nachiketa said in the Kathopanishad, that Bahu namemi prathamo, bahu namemi madhyamaha. That while I'm best among many things, I am moderate in many things, but I'm not useless in any way. So just kind of remembering that, if we have a good self-understanding of where we are, we don't all have to be like geniuses, but if we are fully aware of our strengths and weaknesses, we can be completely at peace with ourselves. So no matter what anyone says to us, is not really they are not changing us. They are just it's a way that we can ask ourselves how secure we feel within. And so any kind of I think I'm just kind of beating this horse too much. Why I say all this is that one sign of spiritual maturity would be that can I sit across a table and have tea or coffee with someone with whom I totally disagree, and that person totally disagrees with me, and that person thinks that I am terrible, or that person thinks my ideas are terrible, and I can just sit calmly, listen to what that person has to say, and have the strength of mind to say, well, these are the reasons I don't think I agree with you. It's not that we have to just listen quietly, passively. That's not what I'm suggesting. So you can listen to what others have to say and then have your say about why you agree or disagree with that person. But there is no reason to get upset or angry about these things. Anyway, so that's not really what Swamiji is saying here in that context. But this saying, whenever I read this, the rose by any other name smell as sweet, I'm always struck by how helpful that this saying can be in our daily lives. So let's continue. I remember as a boy hearing a Christian missionary preach to a crowd in India. Among other sweet things he was telling them was that if he gave a blow to their idol with a stick, what could it do? One of his hearers sharply answered, "If I abuse your God, what can he do?" "You would be punished," said the preacher, "when you die." "So my idol will punish you when you die," retorted the Hindu. Again, I mean, it's the same kind of a response, the counter response. If you think that my worshipping of images is wrong, then what would happen? And if this is what would happen if I don't do it, then my image can do exactly the same. And a story that often comes to my mind, and this happened in northern India. It's in a place near Ranchi. It was formerly a part of Bihar, and now it's a separate state in India. I think it's called Jhargram, and I think Ranchi is the capital of that. So that part of India is often called, I hope I'm not making a mistake, I think it's called Chota Nagpur area, I think. Or again, it doesn't matter what it was called. So this is the story I heard, that, sorry. So in that part, it's a predominantly a tribal area, and the missionaries have been very active in that part for decades. So in one village near Ranchi, so there was this one church and one minister who was a pastor there. He was a very good man, very kind man, and he had helped those tribals, and they loved him. And he had managed to convert them all. Pretty much the entire village had become Christian. And they would all very religiously go to the church on Sundays, and everything was fine. Then when the pastor had once gone on a long vacation, some 2 or 3 weeks he was away, and then when he returned, that day happened to be the day of some tribal festival. And they had their own tribal deity. And so just at a little across outside the church, they had built that deity, and they were all in the tribal dance and singing, everything was going on. And this pastor was horrified. He's like, wait a minute, no, you're not supposed to be doing this. Now you come and worship in the church. That's where God is. And this is all false. This is all superstition. Don't do all this. And he scolded them. And those tribals were so horrified at this. And then the tribal elder, and this actually happened. This is not a made-up story, because we have a center in that part. So one of the Swamis who was there, and where the tribals came and they narrated this story to him. So this is exactly what happened there. So these tribals, they actually loved that pastor because he was a good man. So when they saw him criticizing and condemning their worship that they were doing, so they went and told him, no, please, don't say such terrible things about this deity. We will do exactly you say. We do come to the church regularly. We will do everything. But don't say anything about this is a very powerful deity. If you do something, you will suffer like anything after death. Now, why I say this is that in the minds of those tribals, this deity that they are worshipping has exactly the same place in their religious horizon, in their mind, that a god, a monotheistic god, whichever god we might have inside a church or a temple or a synagogue. And so if we kind of limit it to saying, no, God cannot be worshipped this way, but that's only the real God, then all these conflicts and quarrels come. And so that's what Swamiji is pointing out here, that if you say, well, this God will punish you after death, well, then there's what you call idol. Now, the word idol, I need to say something about that as well. Now, oftentimes, the word idol is a little bit problematic. It's problematic because the word gets used as a common equivalent of the images that Hindus worship, what they say murti, the murtis that the Hindus worship. But the word idol also had a very specific theological meaning in Christian texts and Jewish texts. So what the idol means, it really is all Abrahamic, even the Quran has it. An idol means worshipping anything other than God. That's an idol. And any material object that is worshipped as God, that's an idol. Now, what Swamiji will then go on to say is that the murtis that the Hindus worship cannot be called idol in that technical sense. Because when a Hindu stands before an image made of a stone or a wood, or stand before a photograph of Krishna or Shiva or Vishnu or Ramakrishna for that matter, nobody is saying that photograph is God, or I'm like prostrating before this piece of wood or this stone. What the worshipper sees there is the divine. And so it's not an idol in that technical sense. Unfortunately, again, what Swamiji says, the religion of the ignorant, most people don't study theology. They are not aware of these theological things. So a lot of times you will find in India now there is this Ganesh Puja, and they'll say, oh, now the idols are being taken out for immersion. Now, a lot of those people, even newspapers in India, they are just, it's a very innocent translation. Oh, now the murtis are being taken. But those of the word idol can ring a very different bell in the mind of someone who looks at idol from that very theological standpoint. And so, well, Hindus themselves call what they do as idol worship. So this is one technical point, and there's nothing you can do about it usage, because most people, as I said, don't study theology. It's a little bit like sometimes the word self that gets used in relation to the idea of the self in Vedanta, for that matter. And I've seen that even in some Buddhist texts about when they are trying to critique the idea of, those are trying to emphasize the no self in Buddhism, and they try to critique the self that is referred to often in Vedanta. And we see that that critique is problematic, because what their understanding of self or what they are critiquing is not the self that this Vedanta students see it as. So there is all this problem about translation that occurs in both ways. So let's continue reading. The tree is known by its fruits. When I have seen amongst them that are called idolaters, men the like of whom in morality and spirituality and love I have never seen anywhere, I stop and ask myself, can sin beget holiness? So again, if image worship itself were terrible or sinful, then we might ask, how can doing something sinful lead to an increase in one's holiness? How can it lead to a person who can grow and evolve spiritually by doing something sinful? In other words, Swamiji is saying that if by doing these kind of worship, and you use images for worship, if it can make you a saint, then how can we say it's something wrong? How can we say something bad? In fact, in one place, Swami Vivekananda said, because we know Ramakrishna himself was a worshipper of Kali. He worshipped, there was this beautiful image of Kali in Dakshineshwar. And so Swami Vivekananda once said that if by worshipping images one can become like Ramakrishna, I'm ready to worship thousands of images. So again, that's why he meant by saying a tree is known by its fruits. Superstition is a great enemy of man, but bigotry is worse. Bigotry is a very strong form of intolerance. Why does a Christian go to church? Why is the cross holy? Why is the face turned toward the sky in prayer? Why are there so many images in the Catholic Church? Why are there so many images in the minds of Protestants when they pray? My brethren, we can no more think about anything without a mental image than we can live without breathing. By the law of association, the material image calls up the mental idea and vice versa. This is why the Hindu uses an external symbol when he worships. He will tell you it helps to keep his mind fixed on the being to whom he prays. He knows as well as you do that the image is not God, is not omnipresent. After all, how much does omnipresence mean to almost the whole world? It stands merely as a word, a symbol. Has God superficial area? If not, when we repeat that word omnipresent, we think of the extended sky or of space, that is all. And we find that somehow or other, by the law of our mental constitution, we have to associate our ideas of infinity with the image of the blue sky or of the sea. So we naturally connect our idea of holiness with the image of a church, a mosque, or a cross. The Hindus have associated the ideas of holiness, purity, truth, omnipresence, and such other ideas with different images and forms. But with this difference, that while some people devote their whole lives to their idol of a church and never rise higher, because with them, religion means an intellectual assent to certain doctrines and doing good to their fellows, the whole religion of the Hindu is centered in realization. Man is to become divine by realizing the divine. Idols or temples or churches or books are only the supports, the helps of a spiritual childhood, and on he must progress. Swamiji is making a very, very profound observation here, that if we must use the word idol, then it's not just what we place on an altar and worship, that's an idol. Any kind of a material support is an idol. So if in order for me to associate the idea of spirituality or God, if I go to a place and it has a specific architectural form, whether it looks like a church, a synagogue, a mosque, or a temple, or a gurudwara, just going into that building with the architecture which I mentally associate with God, and if it makes me remind of God, then that place is a kind of an idol, because I'm using a material support to think of, to pray to someone who is not material. And so in that sense, therefore, if it's wrong to have an image to worship, then it would be equally wrong to have specific places with certain architectural motives to think of God. It would also then bring into question, why would I need to go to Mecca, for instance, and look at this very holy, sacred presence of God that is felt at Kaaba? But that is still, now if someone said, well, that's only a stone, that would be extremely offensive, because those who go to worship, they feel the presence of God. So just as it would be offensive to refer to the sacred places of worship or sacred symbols of worship in material terms, because to people who worship there, people who pray there, what they are praying to, the place they are in, is more than simply just a building. There is the presence of God there. And so Swamiji is saying that using this material support is a constitutional necessity of the human mind. And therefore, there is nothing implicitly wrong in using this support. This is a fairly long discussion, and Swamiji will continue this, so we will take it up next week as well. But let's spend some time now with some of the comments or questions or thoughts that you might have.
These comments that Swami Vivekananda made were obviously very bold, strong, and many of us could be intimidated to go to a new place and speak so honestly. What was the reaction of the audience to his words?
Well, I would think they must have been mixed. I mean, it looks like, considering that they when this paper was presented, that they embraced him with open arms, that he became so, people looked forward to listening to him, so it clearly resonated in the minds of many people. But it's also true that some of the very orthodox among his audience, they were horrified because this was completely contradicting the narrative about Indian religions that was being propagated here by missionaries. So they were not really happy that there was this kind of an acceptance by a large number of people. If you look at the media reports of this Chicago conference, they were largely very positive. And so it seems like this resonated in the minds of most people. Any other ideas, Ashish?
Swamiji, you talked about the quote, rose called by any other name would smell as sweet. And you gave examples of how, if someone calls me stupid, it doesn't make me stupid. And that's great, and that's a great example. But Swamiji, also the flip side of it is overconfidence and basically having a false belief, understanding, basis of me being always right or things like that. So Swamiji, could you comment on how do you achieve that balance? How do you, so you also gave an example of you're sitting in front of someone who you don't agree with, or that person doesn't agree with your ideas, but not everything that the person says may be wrong. There might be some things.
Absolutely, that's true.
And it's a challenge, Swamiji.
No, it's not a challenge. I think so long as, that is why Sri Ramakrishna is saying, as long as I live, so long do I learn. If we hold on that awareness that I'm a student all through my life, even after graduating from school, my learning should not stop. I will continue to learn from life every day, every moment. So yes, we have our ideas about who I am, as a person, I'm not talking about even Atman or anything, just as a person, who I am, and what my ideas and thoughts are. And clearly, if I'm holding certain ideas, I'm holding certain thoughts, it certainly means that at that moment, I think those ideas are good or right, otherwise why would I hold them? At the same time, being a student means the willingness to at least accept the possibility that, at least in some respects, I could be wrong about my understanding of myself or about my ideas. Secondly, that there could be a better way. I don't have to be wrong, but maybe my understanding is rather incomplete, and there could be a better, deeper way in these things. So there's always a possibility that not only from a person who is sitting across the table from me, but even from some chance conversations I might hear on a subway or some program you're listening to on a radio or television, if I always remember that I have something to learn, I can then be able to weigh the ideas and impressions and thoughts I hear from other people. And I already have my own ideas and impressions and thoughts, and be willing to say, well, if something makes greater sense, then I must have the courage to let go and say, this understanding is better. So now then, and once I accept it, then that becomes again my new thought. That becomes mine. I take ownership of that. Now I will not be able to take ownership of that unless and until I'm able to let go if this completely contradicts whatever idea I had up to then. So same thing with regard to truth. If someone says, I'm wrong, I can look in my heart and say, am I really wrong? And again, we can all try to be as much objective as possible. It's not always possible because the ego gets in the way. But the more ego gets out of the way, and we say, well, if someone says I'm wrong, and I look in my heart and try to say, and it doesn't feel that I'm wrong, then I can keep my cool and then explain to the person, no, I don't think I'm wrong. Or if I look in my heart and say, well, maybe I am wrong, then I can be grateful that this person pointed out to me, because otherwise, if that person had not pointed it out to me, I would not have known I'm wrong. In either way, the idea is, can we just not lose our cool? Because in life, we make mistakes. We do things or say things that we regret later, only when we lose our cool. Swami Vivekananda's one in Karma Yoga, Swamiji says in one place, the calmer we are, and the less the calmer we are, and the less disturbed our nerves, oh my God, I knew this quote so well. Okay, the calmer we are, and the less disturbed our nerves, the better will our work be. The calmer we are, the less disturbed our nerves. There is some phrase I think I'm missing, but that's the idea. The calmer we are, the less disturbed our nerves, blah, 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 and the better will our work be. So the emphasis is on calmness, remaining kind of peaceful. So yes, it's true. If I'm too certain that I have got all that right, I've got all the ideas, I know who I am, nobody knows, then I'm in trouble. Then I'm going to suffer for that kind of thinking. On the other hand, the other extreme also is possible. I'm not sure about anything. That is not good either. I mean, there has to be some confidence in oneself. And as Swamiji said, first have faith in yourself, then have faith in God. So we must have faith in ourselves, but faith in ourselves doesn't mean kind of a closed mind that nobody can teach me anything. I already have all the answers. Because if I already have all the answers, I would be an enlightened being. The fact that I'm not enlightened yet means there are things that need working within me. That's as simple as that. Yeah. Srikant? Yeah.
Swamiji, I was thinking about, you talked about the philosophical part and the practical part you were saying. I think it is more of experience which gives us the wisdom. So is it experience, the doing of religion, or doing part of the religion, or just sitting and thinking like philosophy?
I think experience comes both ways. I mean, even through deep reflection, you can get experience. Because as I said, even thinking is an activity.
Okay.
It's not just doing means only kind of doing something with hands. Even if someone is just sitting and meditating, that's an activity. That person is doing something. So we can never be not doing. Not doing is really not an option, because we cannot not do. The only choice we have is whether I should do this or I should do that. There is no choice about not doing, because we cannot not do. As long as we have a body and mind, we are always doing something. Even when you are fast asleep, you are still breathing, your blood circulation is still going on. Something is happening, some activity is going on even when you are fast asleep. What to speak about when we are awake? So not doing is not an activity, not a choice.
And by reading and listening to what the trend is, people who think are philosophical, they call themselves spiritual. And if you do something religious activity, it is more or less called religious. It is not spiritual. So I don't think...
Rose by any other name. Doesn't matter what anybody calls. That's the thing. Yeah. Doesn't matter who calls what. Yeah. Mahendra? Yeah.
Swamiji, when Swami Vivekananda was here in America in those days, I'm assuming at that time there were no sort of... He said that Hindus never went out to convert other people around the world. Mm-hmm. And I think it was mentioned previously in this one, I think, and he has said that before. What has changed in terms of the way now that you find that there are so many sort of centers like Ramakrishna Mission or some other centers that have opened across the globe for whatever purposes that they are serving, compared to the way the Christians have gone out and then converted people into the other countries?
Right. So the Vedanta Society, we don't convert anybody. So even if someone were to come and say, oh, can you make me a Hindu? So, no. We don't make anybody. We just like, well, if whatever ideas are discussed here, if it helps to enrich your spiritual life in some way, feel free to accept what makes sense to you. If something doesn't make sense, ask questions. If you don't get satisfactory answers, well, don't make it a part of your life. So therefore, this is a little bit different. We are not like making Hindus. So Hinduism has not been traditionally, I mean, which is not to say that nobody does it. There are, I think Arya Samaj probably in the Hindu tradition, they have some rituals about if someone wants to become officially a Hindu. So they have evolved certain kind of ceremonies, and then because you see, I mean, it's a little bit like this. Identity is a twofold thing. And that is, identity means how I see myself. That's one way identity gets expressed, and how others see me. Now, I have full control about how I see myself or how I want to see myself. I mean, who's going to stop me? Nobody, because no law, no government has access inside my head. So how I see myself, I have like total freedom. I can see myself whatever way I want. In terms of my religious identity, gender identity, whatever identity I want, I can see who I am. That's it. Now, how other people will see me, there is a kind of a limitation to that. Because first of all, because we don't control other people's thinking. So other people may have their own ideas about who I am. Now, some people might say, I don't care what other people think. They can think of me whatever they want. But I know inside who I am. But then there are some other people who say, no, it is a matter of concern to me about how other people identify me. And therefore, then you need to go through these social requirements or rituals to go through certain motions to kind of acquire a social identity by which people will see you. I mean, even for that matter, even marriage ceremony or then an engagement ring, it's like, well, if two people are married, marriage is again, people say marriage of the minds. Okay, that's true, but then how will society even know? So if you want like a society to recognize your standing, then we say, then you have some kind of a ceremony. Even if it's not a religious ceremony, you have something which is visible to society to know your identity in a certain way. It's the same thing with regard to religion. It's possible for someone to say, I'm very religious, but externally, I may not have any marks. It's possible to be someone who might be very monastic in their thinking and may never wear a monastic robe. Now, this is almost like being out in the world. Like if most people, if they see someone wearing like this, even if they may not exactly be able to identify from which this, at least now, most people, at least in urban areas, unless it's a Halloween day or something, most people will recognize, well, looks like some kind of a religious robe. So this is like obvious. But it's possible that someone might have this complete same monastic frame of mind and thinking and may never wear that external thing. So nobody else would know what this person's identity is. But this person inside can be, I'm a monk or I'm a nun. So similarly with regard to religious identity also. So I know a few people who were not, for instance, born into the Hindu tradition. But somehow the way the Hindu tradition explains about their identity, about God and so on, resonated with them so well that they said they wanted to be Hindus. And then they went to certain organizations and got to the ceremonies, and sometimes they get a kind of a Hindu-sounding name, or sometimes the names remain same, or sometimes, again, it's left to their choice. But then, having gone through the ceremonies, then you have things like, now I'm a Hindu. Not only that I'm a Hindu inside, but then I can tell my friends or whoever, like, I'm a Hindu, even socially. I mean, in the different sects within Hinduism, the Vaishnavas have certain markings, or the Shaktas. Again, what is the necessity of doing that? If I'm a worshipper of Vishnu or Shiva, that is completely an internal thing. But if I want to be recognized socially with that identity, then I might have certain social marks outside which are visible to others and they can identify. So identity is like that. And so depending on how much important it is for me that others see me in a certain way, that is how the priorities in my life or what I might do will depend on both my self-identity and what my social identity I would like to be known as. That's right.
Just one thing that you mentioned Arya Samaj, and so in the time when Ramakrishna was there was also Brahma Samaj, and Arya Samaj was not, and I know because I've been in there, they don't at all promote idol worship, actually. And what was the Swamiji's thoughts around in India of those days when they wouldn't promote idol worship? And sometimes I think I've seen people actually in Arya Samaj criticize idol worship in India itself.
Yeah. I mean, both Arya Samaj, Brahmo Samaj, and there was in Maharashtra area, I think, there was on Prarthana Samaj. So these are the very reform movements that came in the 17th and 18th century in India. Now, and they were all reform movements, and they took rather some different trajectories. So Arya Samaj was, because of this strong criticism, because India was 600 years under Muslim rule, then 350 years under British rule. So there's all these strong critiques about the religious practices in the Indian subcontinent from these different forces that had come from outside the border. And so the reformists within Hinduism reacted to it in different ways. And one way that the Arya Samaj dealt with it was, let's go back to the Vedas. And Vedas time, there was no image worship. It was all fire worship, so all the yajnas and everything. So they took that tack of like, okay, if the Westerners condemn image worship, we condemn it too, because it is not there in the Vedas. So that was the way the reformists reacted. The Brahmo Samaj also did that. Brahmo Samaj then said, no image worship. So whatever was unacceptable to what was seen as a kind of the civilized world. There was also the kind of a colonial legacy that because these people are powerful, they were more civilized, and if they don't like it, the best way is to then excise those parts which are not acceptable in the current times. So a little bit like if someone says, nowadays a lot of cosmetic surgeries like that. Oh, this is not this kind of the shape of the nose or the ear or something that kind of needs altering because this is not considered beautiful anymore. So it was all reformists are kind of little cosmetic surgeries, like, oh, this is no more acceptable, so let's change it. It's a little bit like that. So, and what Swami Vivekananda did was, he was a reformer in his own way, but what he did was that rather than kind of chop off the parts which are not acceptable, what he said was, let's see the psychology behind it, that why it is being done. It's not, as he will say further on in this talk, image worship is not mandatory. Nowhere in the Hindu said, you've got to have a murti, you must worship. No must. It's like, well, if it helps you, do it. If you don't need it, don't do it. But why take away the choice? Now, this is a completely out-of-topic remark. Well, it's a little bit like this debate going on about Medicare for all, or Medicare for all who want it. Now, I said this is not really exactly dealing with it, but it's a little bit like, that's become a big point issue because people say, do I have a choice? They may not use that choice, but at least they're feeling that I have a choice. So that's the idea here. What Swamiji is saying is not like saying this is right or that's wrong. He's just saying is, you have a choice. And then Swamiji again points out that image worship doesn't have to be surgically removed from the tradition, because worshipping the images has produced people of exalted character, those whom we worship today as great saints and mystics. And that's what he says, can sin beget holiness? These people who began their spiritual life worshipping images are now adored and worshipped all over the world. So who can say that, oh, that's bad, or it shouldn't be a part of the tradition? That's the idea. Yeah. Actually, yeah.
Swamiji, to your point earlier about identity, in the context of Advaita Vedanta, isn't the whole point to transcend identity?
It's not so much to you could say transcend one's present identity. I think the idea is we have forgotten who we are because we have taken on a false identity. So you could say a better way to express that would be to regain our true identity. That's the idea.
Okay. And Swamiji, in the context of this conversation about Hinduism, could you make a distinction between Hinduism and Sanatana Dharma? And the reason I ask this is because my understanding is that the word Hinduism is largely a Western construct to begin with. And so could you please explain in this context what that distinction might mean?
Well, again, I would go back to that rose by any other name. I think because they had to give some word to whatever the religious life of the people in the Indian subcontinent was. And so because the people were called as Hindus, you know the history of Hindus, because the Sindhu River and so on. And so I do remember reading somewhere that the first known use, kind of an official use of the word Hinduism is pretty recent. I think it was sometime in 1830 or something, that in some British document they referred to the religion as Hinduism. So it's pretty recent in that sense. And yeah, so I don't make too much distinction between it. I would say what is Sanatana Dharma is now increasingly being called Hinduism. Yeah. Anish, you wanted to say something? Yeah.
The rose by any other name it smells as sweet. It's very interesting. The thought that I had was that many people try to define you. So other people have their agendas. The people you come across in the world, they have agendas. They want to influence you. They want to define you in some way. So it seems like that saying is.
Hold it closer. I'm not able to hear you. Yeah.
I was just saying that people try to define, who you are. So many times people have a reason to influence you, like salespeople might want to influence you, or different people might want to influence you for whatever reason. And so they define you as being something. Yep. And it just seems to me like Swamiji is responding to that because the Hindus have been defined as being polytheistic as opposed to, monotheistic, and in a way that allows them to be more easily criticized.
Absolutely.
And so he's trying to address that. And so it's kind of interesting that the strength of India is the spirituality, but then other people are trying to criticize India for the way it actually does spiritual practices and a spiritual approach. But then Swamiji is showing us the way to overcome that, it seems to me, is by looking deeper, because it's easy to criticize somebody else, but then it's only when you go deeper can you can show that there's a fallacy to their argument. And so it seems like Swamiji is kind of making a very broad point here about about this.
Absolutely, yeah. I totally agree with that. Yeah, that's true. And oftentimes the tragedy in some ways is that it's the powerful, those who are powerful, whether it's militarily, economically, politically, or socially, or whichever, they get to set the terms. They have got a much louder voice, much wider reach, and so they get to define, like, you are this, you are that. I mean, Hinduism itself is a good thing. It's like now, no matter where you go, the tradition gets known as Hinduism, but it's not an indigenous term. It's not how the people call themselves. But there's nothing you can do about it now. And so, best is to say, just embrace it, recognize that historically it's new, rather than kind of just fight the system and say, no one should use the word Hinduism, just Sanatana Dharma. I mean, some people try to do that, and maybe there is some utility in some people doing that as well. But it just seems like, why bother? That's the idea. Yeah. Any other thoughts? Okay, so we'll stop here today. And then, so next Wednesday would probably our last study group meeting, because we won't meet after Christmas, and then we'll have a recess in January. So we will continue the discussion when we meet next Wednesday. Om Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhur Muhuhu. Speaking of which, next Sunday will probably be the last satsang before the recess, because the Sunday after that we'll have a birthday puja of Holy Mother Sharda Devi. So next Sunday, our subject will be inner wandering. And next Wednesday, as I said, we'll have this study group meeting. And on Tuesday and Saturday, our meditation will also continue as usual. So let's conclude with a prayer now. May the Divine Being, who is the Father in heaven of the Christians, Holy One of the Jewish faith, Allah of the Muslims, Buddha of the Buddhists, Tao of the Taoists, Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, the Great Spirit of the Native Americans, and Brahman of the Hindus, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May we be granted strength, freedom, and clear understanding. May we learn to see God in our own hearts and in everyone around us. May God bless us all and fill our hearts with gratitude, grace, and love. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto you.